They said the village was gone forever. She proved them wrong. When the floodwaters came, the village of Lower Myr was erased from the maps. Old houses drowned, orchard rows twisted under waves, and stories scattered like seeds on the wind. For 20 years, no one returned, except for Mara. She arrived with a battered rowboat, a tangle of diving gear, and a memory she refused to let go. Her grandmother's lullaby, sung on the last night before the water rose. Villagers in nearby towns watched from the hilltops. "She's wasting her time," they muttered. "There's nothing left beneath those black waters but ghosts and mud." Mara ignored them. She tied her boat to the half-sunken bell tower, pulled on her suit, and slipped beneath the surface, searching for a heartbeat in the drowned silence. The world below was not dead, only changed. Mara swam through shattered windows, brushing her hand along doors still painted with familiar names. Sunlight cut shafts through murky green, revealing schoolbooks, pots, and stone steps, lost but not destroyed. She mapped the underwater ruins, filling a notebook with sketches and careful notes. On her fourth dive, Mara found the statue of the river goddess, arms outstretched, moss clinging to her cheeks. It was then she realized the bones of the village were intact. Walls still stood, orchard roots pushed up through silt. Even the old bridge, though broken, offered a pathway for hope. She surfaced, determined not just to remember, but to rebuild. Rebuilding began with stubborn hands and simple tools. Mara salvaged beams and bricks from beneath the waves, drying them in the sun. Each night she lit a fire on the shore, and the smoke drew the curious. A fisherman, a pair of teenagers, an old carpenter with shaking hands. They listened to Mara's stories, of music in the square, the taste of autumn pears, the way the village once glowed with lanterns on summer nights. Slowly, they offered help. The fisherman brought nets to dredge up sunken timbers. The carpenter taught Mara how to brace new walls with old wood. Hope flickered, as if some forgotten song was being hummed into the dusk. And the villagers on the hilltop watched, wondering if maybe, just maybe, what was lost could live again. The days blurred into weeks as the team on the shore grew. Others joined Mara, a botanist drawn by the rumors of stubborn orchard roots, a stonemason eager to see if the old bridge could truly rise again, and families whose ancestors had once called Lower Myr home. Together, they built a floating dock to serve as their new town square. Boats came and went, loaded with salvaged bricks, saplings, and tools. At night, they shared food and told stories, some true, some grown grander with every telling. The laughter echoed across the water, waking memories long thought drowned. Hope grew with every new face around the fire. Challenges came quickly. Early efforts to clear the silt clogged by rotten timbers triggered a landslide underwater, threatening to collapse the last standing schoolhouse wall. Mara rallied everyone, organizing shifts to shore up foundations and weave willow baskets to trap debris. The river fought them at every turn, storms, shifting currents, and days when the water was so cold it numbed the bones. But the group pressed on, inventing new tools, mapping every underwater chamber, and learning how to harness the tides instead of fighting them. The old bridge's first arch was lifted above the water, cheered by everyone from the shore. On that day, even the skeptics watching from the hilltop found themselves hoping again. With the foundation secure, rebuilding blossomed. Saplings from the drowned orchard were coaxed back to life, their roots split and replanted on higher ground. The botanist experimented with reeds and wildflowers that thrived in soggy earth, planting green borders around the rising homes. A floating school was built from scavenged timbers, its lessons mixing old village lore with new survival skills. Children laughed as they learned to swim before they could read, chasing minnows in the clear shallows. Mara kept her grandmother's lullaby alive, singing it as she worked, the melody carried by wind and water. The village, once lost, now found itself in a new form, half memory, half invention, all hope. Summer brought both bounty and challenge. Crops planted on floating beds flourished, tomatoes, beans, even sunflowers stretching above the water's edge. Fishermen caught silver carp from the river, and wild ducks returned to nest in the reeds. But storms swept in without warning, churning the water and battering the docks. One fierce gale ripped loose the roof of the new schoolhouse, scattering books and boards across the shallows. Mara led the recovery, diving to retrieve lost timbers and organizing teams to rebuild. They reinforced the docks, lashed roofs with braided rope, and planted willow stakes to hold the platforms steady. Each storm left the village a little stronger, a little wiser, and ever more determined to survive. News of the reborn village spread beyond the valley. Travelers arrived, drawn by stories of sunken bells and gardens on the water. Some brought seeds, others offered trade, clay pots, bright cloth, and stories of their own exiled homes. With every visitor, the village changed. New skills were taught, weaving nets for both fish and rescue, building floating beehives, crafting musical instruments from river cane. Myr welcomed them all, but made one thing clear. Everyone worked, everyone shared, and everyone respected the water that now ruled their lives. The floating square grew lively. Markets, music, lessons, and laughter filled the air. Lower Myr, once lost and forgotten, was becoming a legend. Memory shaped every stone they raised. Myr organized a festival to honor those who had lived in Lower Myr before the flood. Elders came from distant towns, carrying faded photographs and family recipes. There were tears as they recalled the old streets. Cheers as new children raced canoes along those same routes, now rivers instead of roads. By lantern light, Myr stood on the bridge's rebuilt arch and sang her grandmother's lullaby. The crowd joined in, the song echoing over water and wood. That night, it seemed the village itself was breathing again, alive, renewed, and ready for whatever the river would bring next. With each season, the village adapted and flourished. Garden rafts multiplied, tethered in calm inlets, bursting with vegetables and flowers. Children grew up swimming, fishing, and rowing, calling themselves the river's children, proud of the world Myr helped create. But not every memory was easy. A year of heavy rains threatened to drown the young orchards again, flooding paths and washing away new homes. Myr gathered everyone in the floating square. They built higher walkways, wove reed barriers, and reinforced roots with stone. The botanist experimented with hybrid saplings, and the village learned to see every challenge as a puzzle to solve, not a doom to fear. When the floodwaters receded, what remained was stronger, deeper roots, higher platforms, and tighter bonds. The outside world took notice. A local official visited by boat, offering supplies and asking for a share of the harvest. Myr met him at the bridge, surrounded by her counsel and the laughter of children. "We rebuilt what you left behind," she said. "If you wish to trade, bring us books, tools, or new seeds, but no one here will pay for survival twice." The official left, frustrated but empty-handed. The village's unity proved its best defense. No outside power could buy what they had built together. The council drafted a charter. All who came would contribute and share. No one would ever be left behind, forgotten, or alone in the water. Lower Myr became a beacon for the hopeful and the exiled. Those fleeing drought, war, or their own pasts found welcome on the floating docks. Musicians taught new songs, builders raised new platforms, and artists painted the story of the drowned village on every raft and wall. Myr, though weathered by years on the water, remained the village's heart. She trained new leaders, shared her journals, and encouraged every child to dream bigger than the riverbanks. Each spring, the village celebrated Remembrance Day, launching lanterns to honor those lost to the flood and planting new saplings in their name. The story of Lower Myr traveled far. What was once believed gone forever had become a home for all who dared to hope. As the years turned, Lower Myr became a place of learning. A floating library was built, filled with books rescued from the flood and donated by travelers. Teachers arrived to instruct children in reading, mathematics, and the stories of many lost villages now revived on water. Engineers from distant cities visited, marveling at how homes stood strong against currents and storms. Myr and her council welcomed them, sharing designs for anchored rafts, hybrid crops, and water filtration systems. Some experts offered blueprints for bigger bridges and safer homes, but Myr reminded them, "The river is our teacher. We build with patience, and we build for the next flood, not just the next season." Knowledge flowed in every direction. Lower Myr was no longer just a village, but a school for the world. Challenges came with new faces. A group of ambitious traders tried to monopolize the floating market, raising prices and excluding the poorest. Tension simmered, tempers flared at council meetings. Myr addressed the village from the bridge. "We rose from ruin by working together. No one's profit is worth the return of old hungers and loneliness." With the council's backing, the market was made communal once more. Prices were fair, every voice heard, and every newcomer given a chance. The lesson was clear: survival meant generosity, not greed. Trust was their truest currency. Mara's legend grew as she aged. Her hair streaked silver, her voice soft but firm. She continued to dive for sunken treasures. Old carvings, dinner plates, and letters, each a thread tying the present to the past. The floating library held readings of her journals and those of every family who rebuilt Lower Myr. Children grew up knowing not just how to swim and plant, but how to lead, resolve conflicts, and welcome strangers. Every year, Remembrance Day was brighter. More lanterns, more songs, more children standing on the bridge, dreaming of what else might rise from the water. And always, Mara sang her grandmother's lullaby, carried by the breeze to every corner of the new village. Years passed and Lower Myr grew into a living city on water. The floating library expanded, its shelves lined with stories from dozens of rebuilt towns. Children spent their days swimming in the old village streets, now winding canals between lush garden rafts, berry bushes, and fruit trees that arched over the water. Annual festivals drew visitors from distant lands. Canoes and barges formed a rainbow mosaic around the floating square, and markets thrived with music, laughter, and foods once lost to memory: pear tarts, spiced fish, pickled greens. Lower Myr became a center for learning and healing. Its hospital barge cared for both villagers and travelers, and the council sent teachers and builders to other flooded regions, helping spark new floating communities where there was once only despair. Mara watched all of this, sometimes from her quiet garden at dawn, sometimes from the bridge at sunset, always with gratitude for every hand that had built, rebuilt, and restored. She knew that the village's strength came not from its platforms or inventions, but from the hope and care that anchored every person to each other. Mara's final years were filled with both peace and purpose. She spent long afternoons teaching children to dive for lost treasures: old coins, fragments of painted tiles, bottles filled with messages from the past. She encouraged young leaders to ask questions, challenge customs, and invent new ways to live gently on the water. The council expanded to include every generation, every skill, and every dream. They debated openly, welcomed disagreements, and always celebrated together at the end of each season. A grand project was completed: the rebuilding of the bell tower, now rising above the waterline, its bells ringing for the first time in decades. On the day of the first chime, Mara addressed the village and its many guests. "We proved the village was not gone. We raised it, not by fighting the water, but by living with it, by making home out of memory, kindness, and courage." That night, as lanterns drifted across the canals, the bells echoed in every heart. When Mara passed, the whole village mourned and celebrated. On Remembrance Day, every boat circled the old bridge. Children scattered petals and sang the lullaby Mara's grandmother had sung, voices mingling with the wind and the water. A statue of Mara was placed beside the floating library, her hand resting on the railing, her gaze always on the horizon. Lower Myr's legacy grew even after her. Dozens of floating villages rose in distant places, their people carrying Mara's journals and the story of the drowned village brought back to life. Each year, Lower Myr sent out lanterns and seeds, gifts for every place where water had once washed away hope. The village was no longer lost to time or tide. It had become a living promise. Whatever is drowned can rise again, if enough hands and hearts dare to remember.